The dust of a foreign country still felt settled in his lungs, a permanent grit that no amount of clean, American air could scour away. For 10 months, Sergeant Marcus Thorne had lived in a world of beige sand and muted greens, a landscape of perpetual tension where the silence was often more dangerous than the noise. He had returned to a world of vibrant lawns and quiet streets, a place that should have felt like an exhalation of relief, but instead felt like a held breath. The house was the same, a modest 2-story colonial he and Sarah had bought, but the feeling was gone. It was no longer a home. It was a museum of a life that had ended the day he lost her, the day he'd made the choice to deploy, leaving their daughter, Lily, in the care of Sarah's sister, Caroline. He stood in the doorway, duffel bags slung over a shoulder that ached with a familiar, deep-set weariness. Caroline greeted him with a hug that was perfectly measured, her perfume a floral, antiseptic scent that seemed to coat everything. The house smelled like it, too. Lemon polish and air freshener. It was immaculate, a level of tidiness that felt less lived in and more staged. Then he saw her. Lily was standing at the top of the stairs, a small, still figure in a perfectly pressed pink dress. Her dark hair, so like her mother's, was pulled back in a severe ponytail. She didn't run to him. She didn't call out "Daddy." She just watched, her small hand clutching a worn, one-eyed teddy bear. Marcus's heart, a tough and calloused muscle, seemed to crack. He set his bag down slowly, his gaze locked on his daughter. "Hey, Lily Bug," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She took one hesitant step down, then another, her eyes wide and uncertain. He knelt, opening his arms, and she finally walked into his embrace. She was so small, smaller than he remembered. She didn't hug him back tightly. Her arms rested limply on his shoulders. It was as he held her, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, that her short sleeve slid up her forearm. He froze. Along the delicate skin were angry red marks, not the scattered pattern of a playground scrape, but deliberate parallel lines, chafed and raw as if scrubbed with something brutal. "Oh, the poor darling's eczema has been acting up something terrible," Caroline said from behind him, her voice a practiced melody of concern. "The dry air, you know. We've been trying every cream under the sun." Marcus didn't look at Caroline. He couldn't. He gently pushed Lily's sleeve back down, his thumb brushing over the inflamed skin. Lily flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but for a man trained to notice the slightest shift in a landscape, it was a seismic event. He looked into his daughter's eyes and saw not the simple shyness of a child reacquainting herself with an absent father, but a deep, guarded fear. The house was not clean. It was sterile. His daughter was not shy. She was terrified. And Caroline's explanation, so smooth and ready, was not a reason. It was a lie. A well-rehearsed, perfectly polished lie. His homecoming wasn't a return to peace. It was a return to a new kind of war, a silent one being waged within the walls of his own home, and he had just stepped onto the battlefield. He remembered the promise he'd made to Sarah in that sterile hospital room, his words a desperate whisper against the rhythmic beep of the machines. "I'll always protect her." It was a promise he felt he had already broken by leaving. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. Looking at the cold, polished surfaces of the living room, the strategically placed photos of a smiling Lily that felt like propaganda, he contrasted it with the chaotic, joyful mess Sarah had always cultivated. Fingerprints on the windows, toys scattered like landmines of happiness, the smell of baking bread, not bleach. He had left his daughter in what he thought was the next best thing to her mother's arms. But this place, this woman, felt like the antithesis of everything Sarah had been. This was not a sanctuary. It was a cage. The dinner that evening was an exercise in supreme self-control. Marcus sat at the polished mahogany table, a ghost in his own dining room, watching a performance of domestic bliss so flawless it was grotesque. Caroline had prepared a perfect roast chicken, perfect mashed potatoes, perfect green beans aligned on the plate like soldiers on parade. She moved with an effortless grace, a hostess in her element, chattering about Lily's preschool, the neighborhood bake sale, the minor dramas of a life he no longer recognized. Her words were a smokescreen, a cloud of mundane normalcy designed to obscure the truth. Marcus felt the rage coiling in his gut, a cold, tight knot he had to actively suppress. He was a soldier. He knew how to wait. He knew how to observe. He focused on Lily. She sat perfectly upright in her chair, her small hands in her lap when she wasn't using her utensils with a precision unnatural for a 6-year-old. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and her answers were soft, one-word responses. Yes, Aunt Caroline, no, thank you. She ate with a desperate carefulness, her eyes darting from her plate to her aunt, terrified of a single drop of gravy staining the pristine white tablecloth. Lily is such a good eater now, Caroline said, beaming at Marcus. She used to be so fussy, but we've worked on our table manners, haven't we, sweet pea? Lily nodded, her gaze fixed on her plate. Marcus watched as a single green bean rolled from her fork and fell to the floor. The child's entire body went rigid. Her eyes widened in panic, and she looked at Caroline, her breath hitched. Caroline's smile didn't falter, but her eyes, for a fraction of a second, turned to ice. Oops, she said, her voice light, but with an edge like sharpened steel. We'll get that in a moment. The threat was unspoken but palpable. There will be a consequence for this imperfection. Marcus's hand tightened on his own fork, the metal pressing into his palm. He wanted to flip the table, to scream at this woman, to snatch his daughter and run. But that wasn't the mission. The mission was intelligence gathering. The mission was to understand the enemy. He deliberately knocked his own fork to the floor. Clumsy me, he said, forcing a casual smile. He bent to retrieve it, and as he did, he picked up Lily's fallen bean, giving her a small, conspiratorial wink when he sat back up. She didn't smile back, but the terror in her eyes lessened for a moment, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Later, as Marcus was putting his things away in the guest room, his old master bedroom now felt alien to him. He saw a framed photo on the nightstand. It was of him, Sarah, and a 3-year-old Lily at a picnic. Lily was covered in chocolate ice cream, her face a smear of pure, unadulterated joy. Sarah was laughing, a real, uninhibited laugh that he could still hear in his memory. He had been laughing too. They were a mess, a happy, chaotic, loving mess. The contrast between that memory and the silent, terrified child at the dinner table was a physical blow. He remembered that day so vividly. Lily had dumped a whole handful of potato salad onto his lap, and all he and Sarah could do was roar with laughter, pulling their sticky, giggling daughter into a group hug. They hadn't cared about the mess. They had only cared about the joy. What had Caroline taught her to care about instead? He thought about the red marks on her arms, the unnatural stillness, the fear of a single fallen bean. The lie about eczema crumbled further. This wasn't about an allergy. This was about punishment. This was about a meticulous, cruel campaign to scrub away the very essence of a child, her spontaneity, her messiness, her joy. Caroline wasn't caring for Lily. She was erasing her. And he, her father, had been a world away while it was happening. The guilt was no longer a weight. It was a fire, burning away his weariness and forging it into a cold, hard resolve. He would not fail Sarah's memory. He would not fail his daughter again. The next day, Marcus began his reconnaissance. He told Caroline he was going for a long walk to clear his head, a plausible excuse for a soldier reacclimating to civilian life. She accepted it with her customary placid smile, reminding him to be back for lunch at precisely 12:30. His walk had a specific destination. He circled the block, his route taking him past the house of Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who had lived next door since before he and Sarah had even moved in. He remembered her as a kind, watchful presence, always tending her prize-winning roses. He found her on her front porch swing, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. "Marcus Thorne," she said, her wrinkled face breaking into a genuine smile. "It is so good to see you home, son." He sat with her for a while, making small talk about his tour, the weather, her garden. He watched her expressions, gauging her willingness to speak. He was patient. Finally, he steered the conversation. "Lily seems quiet," he said, letting the word hang in the air. Mrs. Gable's smile faded. She looked over at his house, her gaze lingering on the perfectly manicured lawn. Her hands tightened around her glass. "She is," she said, her voice dropping. "Very quiet." He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear warring with concern. "Caroline keeps a tight ship, a very clean ship." The way she said the word clean was laden with meaning. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "How so?" Mrs. Gable hesitated, looking around as if Caroline might materialize from the rose bushes. "At first, I thought it was wonderful. The girl was always so neat and tidy. But you don't see her play outside much anymore. Not in the dirt, anyway. I saw her once, last spring, start to make a mud pie by the back fence. Caroline came out. I didn't hear what she said, but the look on her face, and the way Lily just crumpled. She shook her head, her gaze distant. And sometimes late at night I hear things, through my bedroom window, not shouting, just water running for a long, long time. And sometimes, a little girl's crying." His heart hammered against his ribs. It was the validation he needed, the first piece of external corroboration. He thanked Mrs. Gable, telling her he appreciated her looking out for them. She just nodded, her eyes full of a sad, helpless worry. He walked back not to his house, but around to the back alley. He knew Lily's bedroom window faced the rear of the property. Near the recycling bins, tucked under a loose flagstone he and Lily had used as a secret hiding spot for treasure years ago, he found something. It was a single sheet of paper, folded into a tiny square. He opened it carefully. It was a child's drawing. On one side was a bright yellow sun and a green lawn, a memory of a happier time. But on the other side, the side that had been folded inward, was a different picture. A large, dark figure with a furious, scribbled face stood over a much smaller figure. The large figure was holding something scrub brush-like, and was rubbing it on the small figure's arms, which were covered in angry red crayon marks. The small figure had no mouth, and giant, watery blue circles for eyes, with crayon tears running down the page. This was not a drawing of a monster from a fairy tale. This was a dispatch from the front line. It was Lily's testimony, a silent scream on paper. He folded it carefully, the flimsy paper feeling as heavy as a steel plate in his hand, and slid it into his pocket. He now had a witness and physical evidence. The first phase of his operation was complete. The drawing burned in his pocket. Every time he looked at Caroline, her serene smile, her gentle inquiries about his day, all he could see was the furious, scribbled monster from Lily's hidden message. He had to maintain his cover, to act the part of the grateful, oblivious brother-in-law. The psychological strain was immense, a pressure cooker of rage with the lid screwed on tight. He needed more than a drawing and a neighbor's suspicion. He needed irrefutable proof. He needed to find the weapon. The opportunity came the following afternoon. Caroline announced she had a hair appointment, an unbreakable ritual of self-maintenance. It was a 2-hour window. As she left, she gave him a list of instructions for Lily's snack and playtime, all of which involved clean, indoor activities. "And please make sure she doesn't get her new dress dirty," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Once her car was gone, Marcus turned to Lily. "Hey, Lilybug, how about we watch a movie? Your favorite." He put on her favorite animated film about a lost fish, settling her on the couch with the one-eyed teddy bear, Barnaby, and a glass of apple juice. He needed her occupied, safe in one place. "I'll be right back. Okay? Just have to make a phone call." She nodded, her eyes already glued to the screen. He moved with quiet, deliberate purpose. His target was Caroline's private space, the master suite. The bedroom was as sterile as the rest of the house, the bed made with military precision, not a wrinkle in the duvet. He started with the en-suite bathroom. It was gleaming, the air thick with the scent of lavender and bleach. He checked the medicine cabinet, nothing but cosmetics and normal toiletries. He checked the shower, the linen closet. Nothing. His heart began to pound with frustration. His time was running out. He forced himself to slow down, to think. Where would you hide something you use regularly but don't want seen? He got on his hands and knees and looked under the large vanity sink. Behind the neatly arranged bottles of toilet cleaner and tile spray, tucked deep in the back corner of the cabinet, his fingers brushed against a plastic storage container. It was unmarked. He pulled it out. The lid was snapped shut tightly. He pried it open. The smell hit him first. Acrid chemical, something far too harsh for a home. Inside, his blood ran cold. There were 3 of them. Stiff-bristled scrubbing brushes, the kind used for cleaning tile grout or car tires. Their plastic handles were worn smooth from use. Next to them was a large, unlabeled bottle of clear liquid and a container of abrasive cleaning powder. And at the bottom of the box, coiled like a snake, was a small, green scouring pad, the kind used on burnt pots. A few strands of dark, fine hair, a child's hair, were caught in its rough fibers. He stared into the box, and everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. The running water Mrs. Gable heard. The parallel red marks on Lily's arms. Her fear of dirt, of any small imperfection. This was Caroline's toolkit. This was the instrument of her cruelty. She wasn't just punishing Lily for being a child. She was literally, brutally scrubbing the childhood off of her. A wave of white-hot fury washed over him, so powerful it made him dizzy. He felt a primal urge to smash the entire bathroom, to find Caroline, and he shut the box. He took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the soldier to take command over the father. Rage was a luxury he couldn't afford. Rage made you sloppy. He needed a plan. He needed to be cold, methodical, and precise. He put the box back exactly where he found it, leaving no trace of his discovery. He walked out of the bathroom, his face a mask of calm, but inside, the war had begun. He now knew the enemy's tactics. The next step was to cut off her supply lines and prepare the field for the final assault. He was operating deep behind enemy lines, and the enemy was sleeping in the room next door. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Marcus had to participate in the charade of a happy family reunion. His every smile a lie, his every calm word an act of monumental effort. He knew what was in the box under the sink. He knew what the running water at night meant. And he had to sit there, making pleasant conversation, while his daughter moved through her days like a ghost, her small face a mask of anxious compliance. His first move was to call in a favor. He contacted a man named David Chun, a former Army intelligence analyst who now ran a very discreet private investigation firm. On a burner phone, standing in the backyard while Caroline was at the grocery store, Marcus laid it all out in cold, clipped sentences. He needed a complete workup on Caroline Bishop. Financials, social history, any sealed juvenile records, everything. I need to know who she is, Dave. I need to know why David, ever the professional, simply said, "Give me 48 hours." The waiting was the hardest part. He focused on reconnecting with Lily, trying to build a bridge across the chasm of fear Caroline had created. He played quiet games with her on the living room floor, building block towers and letting her win at Go Fish. He read her stories at night, his voice a low rumble, trying to fill her room with a sense of safety that had been stolen from it. During a trip to the park, an outing Caroline supervised with the intensity of a prison guard, constantly warning Lily not to get grass stains on her jeans. Marcus watched his daughter. She stood by the swings, watching the other children soar through the air, but she didn't dare ask to join them. She seemed to have forgotten how. Marcus felt a profound, protective ache swell in his chest, a love so fierce it was painful. He was fighting for the little girl in the chocolate-stained t-shirt, the one who remembered how to laugh. That night, a storm rolled in, the wind rattling the windows. Marcus was in his room, unable to sleep, when he heard a faint sound from the hallway. A small cry. He opened his door to find Lily standing there, clutching Barnaby the bear, her small body trembling. A loud clap of thunder shook the house, and she flinched violently. He knelt and gathered her into his arms, carrying her back to her bed. He sat on the edge, stroking her hair. He expected her to be afraid of the storm, but her fear felt deeper, more ingrained. He tucked her in, pulling the covers up to her chin. He was about to leave when her small hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She looked up at him, her eyes wide in the dim light from the hallway. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't let her find the bad spots." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "The bad spots, Lilybug? What do you mean?" She shrank back slightly, as if she'd already said too much. She shook her head, pulling her hand away. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost lost in the sound of the rain, she whispered, "She has to scrub them. To make them clean." It was a confession. It was a confirmation. It was the turning point. He now had the victim's own words. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, his heart breaking. "I won't," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let anyone hurt you ever again. It's over." She didn't understand the finality in his words, but she seemed to understand the promise. Her body relaxed, and her eyes slowly drifted shut. Marcus sat there for a long time, watching his daughter sleep, the soldier's patience solidifying into a plan of attack. The intelligence report from David would be the final piece. Then he would end this. The dossier arrived the next morning as a password-protected file in a coded email. Marcus opened it on his laptop, his door locked. David Chen had been thorough. He scrolled past financial records and employment history to the section marked personal and familial, and there it was. The why. Caroline and Sarah's mother had suffered from a severe, undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive disorder, with a fixation on contamination and cleanliness. The file contained excerpts from a sealed juvenile welfare report, filed after a teacher noticed bruising on a then 9-year-old Caroline. The report detailed a childhood of horrific ritualistic abuse. Caroline had been subjected to daily, hours-long decontamination sessions by her mother, scrubbed with harsh chemicals and brushes for any perceived infraction. A smudge on her clothes, dirt under her fingernails, a C+ on a report card. She wasn't just being cleaned. She was being punished for being an imperfect child. She had been the first victim. Marcus leaned back, the screen's glow illuminating his grim face. This wasn't an excuse for Caroline's actions, but it was an explanation. She wasn't just a monster. She was a broken person perpetuating a cycle of trauma, projecting her own history onto the nearest, most vulnerable target, his daughter. The enemy was no longer a shadowy figure of pure evil. She was a known quantity with a predictable pathology. The knowledge didn't soften him. It hardened his resolve. He now understood the battlefield completely. His own past failure, leaving Lily in the first place, loomed large in his mind. He remembered the argument with Sarah's parents, who had wanted to take Lily. He had insisted on Caroline, believing family was best, believing she was the warm, loving aunt she pretended to be. He had been wrong, and his mistake had cost his daughter her safety and her joy. This wasn't just about rescuing Lily anymore. It was about atoning for that mistake. That afternoon, Caroline's control, already frayed by his presence in the house, finally slipped. Lily was in the backyard, carefully placing dandelions in a row on the pristine patio stones. A monarch butterfly landed on a nearby azalea bush. Forgetting herself for a moment, Lily scrambled to her feet to get a closer look, tripping and landing on the grass, putting a small, green smudge on the knee of her white leggings. Caroline saw it from the kitchen window. She was out the back door in a flash. Lily! The name was a whip crack. All the practiced warmth was gone from her voice, replaced by a raw, cold fury. "What did I tell you? Look at yourself. You are filthy. Absolutely filthy." Lily burst into tears, scrambling backwards away from her aunt. I'm sorry. Marcus stepped out onto the patio, moving between them. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his presence a solid wall. He looked from his crying daughter on the ground to the contorted, furious face of her tormentor. Caroline froze, her mask of composure shattered. She saw the look in his eyes. Not anger, but a cold, clear certainty. She saw that he knew. Her face paled, the rage replaced by a flicker of pure panic. She had made a mistake, a fatal tactical error. She had revealed her true face to the one person who had the power to destroy her. Marcus knelt and gently helped Lily to her feet. "It's just a little grass lily bug," he said softly, his voice steady. "We can clean it up later. No big deal." He looked back at Caroline, his gaze unwavering. "We need to talk." The plan was no longer a future operation. It was in motion. The assault had begun. The confrontation was not a battle of shouting and accusations. Marcus knew that would only give Caroline an escape route, a way to paint him as the unstable, aggressive soldier. His plan was a surgical strike, designed to dismantle her defenses piece by piece in a controlled environment. The next morning, he told Caroline he had arranged for a child therapist to visit the house. "Just a wellness check," he said calmly, lying with the ease of a man who understood the strategic value of deception. "Grief counseling. I think it would be good for Lily, after everything." Caroline, desperate to regain her footing and project the image of a concerned guardian, agreed immediately. She didn't know that the therapist, Dr. Evans, was a forensic psychologist who worked closely with Child Protective Services, and that Marcus had already briefed her on the entire situation. Dr. Evans arrived at 10 o'clock, a kind-faced woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. Caroline played the part of the gracious host, offering coffee and speaking in low, therapeutic tones about Lily's shyness. They all sat in the living room, the sterile showplace for Caroline's perfect life. Marcus let them talk for a few minutes before he made his move. He placed a small, folded piece of paper on the coffee table. It was Lily's drawing. He unfolded it, revealing the monstrous figure scrubbing the small, tearful child. "Lily drew this," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Caroline stared at it, her face tightening. "Children have such imaginations," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. "It's probably a monster from a storybook." "Is it?" Marcus replied, his eyes locked on hers. "Because Mrs. Gable next door told me she hears a little girl crying at night. And a lot of running water." Caroline's composure began to crack. "She's a meddling old woman who—" Marcus cut her off, his voice still quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of command. "I also know about the brushes, Caroline. The ones you keep in a box under your bathroom sink." Her breath hitched. The blood drained from her face. She looked from Marcus to Dr. Evans, a cornered animal searching for an escape. "And I know about what happened to you as a child," Marcus said, delivering the final, decisive blow. "I know what your mother did to you. This isn't about keeping Lily clean. You're punishing her for having the childhood you never got." That was it. The facade shattered. All the carefully constructed control evaporated in an instant. Caroline leaped to her feet, her face a mask of hysterical rage. "You have no right," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "You left her. You abandoned her. I was the one who was here, keeping everything perfect, keeping her safe. She was a messy, disobedient child, and I taught her. I made her better." In that moment, Lily, who had been sitting silently on a small chair, watching everything with wide eyes, did something extraordinary. She stood up, walked across the room, and for the first time since he had returned, she took her father's hand. She didn't say a word, but her small act of defiance was a judgment, a final verdict. She squeezed his hand, a silent declaration of allegiance. The monster had lost its power. Dr. Evans was already on her phone, her expression grim and professional. "Yes," she said quietly into the receiver. "The situation is as we suspected. Please proceed." Caroline stared at Lily holding Marcus's hand, and a sound of pure, desolate defeat escaped her lips. The war was over. Within 15 minutes, the quiet suburban street was no longer quiet. 2 police cars and a vehicle from the county's Child Protective Services division pulled up to the curb, their arrival a calm, methodical invasion of Caroline's perfect world. The uniformed officers who entered the house were not aggressive. Their movements were practiced and professional, but their presence irrevocably shifted the power dynamic. Caroline's hysterical rage had collapsed into a series of shuddering sobs. She was no longer the queen in her castle. She was a suspect in a crime scene. Dr. Evans spoke with the lead CPS worker, a woman named Ms. Albright, handing over her notes and gesturing toward Marcus and Lily, who were still standing together, their hands clasped. Ms. Albright knelt down to speak to Lily, her voice gentle, but Marcus answered for her. "She's been through enough. She'll talk when she's ready," the woman nodded, her eyes filled with a sad understanding. The reckoning cascaded swiftly. One of the officers went to speak with Mrs. Gable. Seeing the official presence, the elderly woman's fear vanished, replaced by a flood of righteous indignation. She spoke for 20 minutes, a torrent of observations she had suppressed for months. The lack of playdates, the obsessive cleaning of outdoor toys, the specific times she'd heard the crying. Her testimony, now on record, was damning. The other officers, with Marcus's direction, conducted a search. They emerged from the master bathroom with the plastic container, bagging the brushes and the scouring pad as evidence. They documented the harsh chemical cleaners. They found Lily's room, a place devoid of the normal clutter of childhood. Her toys arranged on shelves like museum pieces, never to be touched. The evidence of psychological abuse was everywhere. The perfect facade was being dismantled, inventoried, and labeled for what it was: a prison. Caroline was escorted out of the house. She didn't struggle. She seemed hollowed out, a fragile shell from which the monster had been exorcised, leaving nothing behind. As she was led to the police car, she looked back at the house, her perfect, immaculate house, now filled with strangers who saw the truth of it. Her meticulously crafted world had crumbled to dust in less than an hour. Marcus watched her go, feeling not triumph, but a profound, aching sadness for the broken child she had once been, and for the cycle of pain she had continued. Then he looked down at Lily. She was watching, too, her expression unreadable. Ms. Albright approached them. "Sergeant Thorne, we'll need to take Lily for a medical evaluation, and then we can discuss temporary custody arrangements." Marcus shook his head. "There's nothing temporary about it," he said, his voice firm with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. "She's my daughter. She's coming home." He bent down and lifted Lily into his arms. She wrapped her small arms around his neck and, for the first time, held on tight. He carried her out the front door, away from the sterile house and the ghosts of the past 2 years, and he didn't look back. The first night of freedom was spent in a generic hotel room, a neutral space with no memories and no rules. Marcus ordered pizza, and they ate it sitting on the floor watching cartoons. He told Lily she could make as much of a mess as she wanted. She looked at him, confused, and then carefully ate her slice over a napkin, her training still deeply ingrained. But when a piece of pepperoni fell onto the carpet, she looked at him not with panic, but with a question in her eyes. He just smiled, picked it up, and threw it in the trash. "See? No big deal. It was a small moment, but it felt like a monumental victory." That night, the nightmares came. He was jerked awake by her terrified screams. He rushed to her bed to find her thrashing, her hands held up as if to ward off a blow. "It's the bad spots," she cried out in her sleep. "Make it stop." He gathered her up, holding her close, rocking her gently. "I'm here, Lilybug. You're safe. Daddy's here. It's over." He held her until her trembling subsided and she fell into an exhausted sleep in his arms. He didn't put her back in her own bed. He carried her to his and lay down beside her, his arm a protective barrier around her small body. The legal and social fallout for Caroline was swift and severe. Faced with the evidence, the brushes, Mrs. Gable's testimony, Dr. Evans's evaluation, and the medical report detailing the abrasions and chemical burns on Lily's skin, she accepted a plea agreement. She was sentenced to a long-term psychiatric facility, a place designed to treat and contain people whose trauma had made them a danger to others. The court granted Marcus immediate and sole custody of his daughter. The fight was officially over. But as he lay there in the dark hotel room, listening to the soft sound of his daughter's breathing, Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. He was no longer just a soldier returning from war. He was a father, a full-time protector, a healer. He was terrified. He felt utterly unqualified for this mission, a mission for which there was no training manual, no clear objective markers for success. What did he know about raising a daughter, especially one so deeply wounded? He thought of Sarah, of her effortless warmth and patience, and an old, familiar grief washed over him. But this time it was different. It wasn't the paralyzing grief that had sent him overseas. It was a grief that fueled his determination. He looked at the sleeping child beside him, at the faint red marks still visible on her arms, and he made a silent vow. He would learn. He would be patient. He would make 1,000 mistakes, but he would never, ever leave her again. He would build a new home, one filled with laughter and mess and unconditional love. He would help her find the little girl who loved chocolate ice cream and making mud pies. It was the most important mission of his life. 6 months later, the sterile scent of lemon polish and bleach had been replaced by the smell of baking cookies and grass stains. Their new home was a small, rented bungalow with a scruffy backyard that was perfect for digging. It was not immaculate. There were crayon marks on one wall that Marcus hadn't gotten around to painting over. A permanent fort made of blankets and chairs dominated the living room, and Barnaby the one-eyed teddy bear had pride of place on the couch. It was the home of a child who was learning to be a child again. Lily still had quiet days. She still had nightmares sometimes. But the silences were different now. They were comfortable, not fearful, and they were increasingly punctuated by bursts of noise. One afternoon, Marcus was in the kitchen when he heard a shriek of pure, unadulterated delight from the backyard. He rushed to the door, his heart leaping into his throat, his soldier's instincts still wired for alarm. He saw Lily, covered head to toe in mud, standing beside a puddle she had created with the garden hose. She was holding up a fat, wiggling earthworm, her face split by the biggest, most joyful grin he had ever seen. "Daddy, look!" she yelled. "He's so slimy." For a moment, he saw a flicker of the old fear in her eyes as she registered her own messiness. Then she looked at him, and he just started to laugh. It was a deep, genuine laugh of pure relief and happiness. Her grin returned, brighter than before, and she laughed with him. That night he tucked her into bed. She was clean now, her hair smelling of strawberry shampoo, but the memory of the mud and laughter hung in the air. She was holding a new drawing she'd made. It depicted 2 figures, one large and one small, standing under a bright yellow sun. They were both smiling, and they were holding hands. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, her voice sleepy. "I love you more, Lilybug," he said, his voice thick. He kissed her forehead and turned out the light, leaving the door cracked open just enough for the hall light to chase away the shadows. He stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. The war was a lifetime ago. The guilt over his past mistakes was finally being replaced by the quiet confidence of a father's love. He had come home looking for a piece of the life he had lost, but instead, he had found a whole new purpose. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt like he was finally walking toward home. We build our lives around facades, don't we? The perfect job, the perfect family, the perfect home with its perfectly manicured lawn. But how many of those perfect houses hold secrets behind their locked doors? We teach our children about stranger danger, but so often the real monsters are the ones they know, the ones they trust. It's a terrifying thought, but it forces us to ask the hard questions. What does it truly mean to protect a child in a world where the greatest dangers can wear a familiar, smiling face? If you felt that something was wrong, that a child's silence was a little too loud, would you have the courage to ask, to look closer, to risk being wrong? We invite you to share your thoughts on these difficult questions, because every child deserves a champion who is willing to see past the perfect facade.